Hey everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. In case you missed it, we just got finished live streaming. We had an enhanced risk for severe weather today, which was kind of a bust. Not too surprising if you saw last night's video. Not as many of you watched it as the winter outlook, which kind of makes me sad. I'm just playing around. Well, actually it does. But anyway, uh, as far as the tropics are concerned, we definitely needed to make a video about this. I tried to do one this morning, but I just ran out of time. I couldn't really edit anything quickly enough to make a decent video. So here we are now. Apologies there. But this is our current situation. We have Gabrielle here, which is still a category 4. It is weakening as we speak. If we were to go ahead and look at the satellite loop for Hurricane Gabrielle right now, you can see that the eye is beginning to deteriorate. The forward speed has really picked up on this, and there actually has been some hurricane watches, not tropical storm watches. Some hurricane watches that have been issued for the Azores. And a scenario has even come up to where maybe Spain and Portugal could be affected by the extratropical or post-tropical effects of this storm. This is really hauling the mail at this point. It's going at about 21 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for a hurricane. So by the time we get towards early Friday morning, we could start to see some impacts over here. The northern islands are in the cone of uncertainty. It will be a lot weaker by this point. I would say probably down to category 1, might be a minimal hurricane. Structure is definitely not going to look like what it does now, and this is going to be due to a large part of wind, due in large part to some wind shear that we have in play. But obviously, though, as we saw here in this first screen, we have 2 other invest areas now that have popped up. And some people were saying hurricane season was dead. Never count your chickens before they hatch is the lesson here. We have Invest 93 and 94L, and if you look at these on satellite here, 93L looks like it's getting its act together pretty well. 94L is really just kind of in its early infancy stages. 93L is probably going to become our next name storm here. We'll see how things go. I think the next name is Humberto, so it'll be a race between the two as to whether or not, as to which one ends up getting that next name here. As far as the West African coast is concerned, it does look like there's going to be a little bit more activity in the near future. So we're past peak season, but hurricane season is not over. That is the other lesson to be learned in all of this. Looking at the structure at what was category 4 hurricane Gabrielle, that was really impressive. The ironic thing with this year, and this is an interesting stat, every hurricane that we have had has gone to major status this year. We've only had 2, but those 2 have really blown up into something impressive. At its peak, it had winds of up to 140 miles an hour. I would say this is probably about to drop below category 3, or maybe right at it right now. We'll see what happens with that going forward. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at the environmental conditions. We'll start out, of course, with Gabrielle. And if you watch this really closely, you'll see that there is a lot of wind shear on the north side of this system, and this is what's really going to help tear it apart. But it's not going to really stop it for getting over towards Europe here. Depending on how it looks, you never know. We could even do a live stream there. Time zones is always a factor with this, so it'll be kind of touch and go if that even does happen. But, you know, it is what it is. We'll do what we can with what we have available to us. But yeah, it'd be a pretty interesting scenario if that were to occur here. But obviously at this point it will be subtropical or post-tropical at this point. So now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, let's look at our next 2 invest areas. We're going to start out with 93L, and we're going to basically be taking a look at the wind shear over this region here. There is a little bit of a tropical upper level trough here, or tropical upper tropospheric trough, or I try to call it the upper level trough because, well, yeah, not everybody's into weather like I am, and I understand that. But there is a little bit of a tut here that's going to help slow this down in the short term, but in the long term, I would expect this one to become a hurricane, and there's a small chance that it may even become another major hurricane. Wouldn't that be something if this becomes Humberto and then goes to major status 2? We would have an exact match from the number of named storms to hurricanes. But with this one, I would expect this to be a fish storm as well. It already is making that turn out towards sea. There is a chance that it might impact Bermuda at this point, but I'm not really certain as to what we will get from that here. All right, so let's go ahead now and take a look at the potential dry impacts that could also hamper it. Shear is a weakening factor early on, but as it gets towards the north central Atlantic, I think is when we'll start to see its peak. Right now, it looks like it's wrapping itself pretty well with a cocoon of moisture as a whole here is concerned. And then as we go further along here, we'll reset the loop. Doesn't really look like dry air is going to be a factor early on. Maybe as it continues to grow, we might have some struggles on the south side of it. But I think this does give the storm a better chance of flourishing, and flourishing a little bit earlier it will from the looks of it here. We were to go ahead and take a look at what this could turn into on simulated satellite here. The HAFS has it's becoming a pretty notable storm here. Now, obviously, we've seen this before with other systems. Sometimes they just don't get their act together as a whole. But if it does get going, it does look like it becomes pretty notable at the very least here. The structure looks that of a traditional hurricane here. Has that buzzsaw look by the time we get towards the end of the model run. Like so, here you can see the eye pretty clearly at this point. Very good convection around the center circulation based off the satellite imagery. Now, obviously, at this point, it's pretty much hearsay because we're looking like 5 days out, and so much can happen in between then and now. So we'll have to see how this ultimately turns out also. But a lot of models have been on the side of this as well, becoming a more notable system. Now, if we go to 94L, we're going to do the same thing. This kind of gets wacky right here, and this is why sometimes it's hard to use other models like the HAFS, especially since this probably is the first run that we've had with it. Jeez, the low center seems to really kind of pop up around. Seems to pop up mainly around South America, which is crazy. Work, man. Let's go with HAFSA here. We're going to do this in real time. We're not going to edit this out. It's pretty funny, if you ask me, actually. So let's go ahead and take a look at it from here. Wind shear is pretty much going to be the same as what we had with 93L, so perhaps we can work around that. But this is also a new model that's beginning to come in. And it looks like, at least in the short term, we're still a ways off from development here. So that just goes to show that we have a long ways to go with the process of this storm really becoming a thing. But yeah, a lot of the parent models here have this hanging mostly around South America here. And then eventually, and this is where things kind of get messy here, we could be mixing this up with maybe 93L, but the HAFS parent is a little bit better, but not really much of a handle is where the low pressure is. And just so you know, I showed you that HAFS on purpose here. It's a meme. But anyways, as far as development is concerned, I do think that this has a chance of getting going as well, but we're going to kind of be all over the place with it. I think that this is going to take a lot longer to develop than what we have in this 5-day trend here. So we'll have to watch 94L pretty closely to see if this becomes the I name storm. But I'm thinking at this point, I would almost go full send with 93L becoming our next name. But we'll have to see what happens with that. It does look like a low does try to pop up here as we get later down the line. But it's one of those things where it's touch and go. We're just in a wait and see mode with that. I think as this would continue to blossom, if it does continue to blossom, then we might have something here. But it's just one of those things where, we're all over the place with it. And that's usually how the first run tends to go with some of these, unless it's just a really impressive invest or tropical wave. So with that, obviously, there's not really going to be much of a satellite imagery with this, since the low doesn't really seem to pop up here at this point. But what leads me to think that this does get going here is looking at this blend of models here. It's a blend of GFS, European, and also AI models. And the interesting scenario with 94L is if this does get going, there is a chance that depending on how the trough ends up lining up over the lower 48, we could maybe get an impact towards the Carolina coast once more. And I don't know exactly what this would look like, but there are a lot of low pressure centers popping up right around this region. So it's also another reason to think that this does have a solid chance of developing. Now, we saw this with a few other invests, and they pretty much kind of busted out as well in this case. Those model busts are relatively rare, so I'm going to go on board with this ship this time, but also with the thought in mind here that maybe this doesn't form into much of anything. But if it does, I would say over towards the Carolina coast, and I wouldn't even rule out the Florida Peninsula here, maybe Florida Panhandle. You do want to watch this. I don't think this goes past the Bahamas, if anything. Bermuda, obviously, I'm watching you very closely as well with either one of these storms, but I think 93L is going to be the point of interest. And then from that point onward, we're keeping our attention mainly over towards the West African coast. And then maybe in the future, we might be watching a little closer to home. And I've already talked to you guys about my thoughts on the Gulf and the Caribbean right now with it being untapped. This also is another area that's been pretty much untapped as well. So if something does develop over towards the Bahamas, we do need to watch that with extreme interest. So with that in mind, that's the end of the video here. Appreciate you all tuning in for the stream. Appreciate you all who have tuned in for this video. I'm going to call this one an evening. You might see a couple shorts on this, maybe even a couple of jokes. But with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you next time.